Welcome back. I am with Justin Watson. We're going to talk about his writing career. So, Justin, how did you get into this writing gig starting from the beginning? So, like bio time.
Bio time. Okay, so I guess I'll start out by saying that there were only three professions I really seriously considered as a kid. You know, when you're a kid and you're talking about what you want to be when you grow up. One was a soldier, which I ended up being. I did end up joining the army, like my dad, my granddad, and all my uncles. One was actually because my mom was obsessed with Law and Order. For a while, I wanted to be a district attorney. Like I wanted to be a prosecutor for a while. And I'm a very argumentative personality and obviously love the sound of my own voice. So my mom was really hoping I would pursue law. Then in my teenage years, I realized the raw amount of study and work that goes into getting a law degree, and the fact that no one is, or hardly anyone is just a prosecutor, and that it is much more complex than that. And that I realized I would probably take the work too emotionally to be a good prosecutor. So I kind of, put aside the idea of the legal profession. When I was 14 or 15, maybe 16 years old, I thought, man, maybe not for me. Still wanted to be in the Army. So that shaped where I applied for college. The other profession that I've wanted to be since I was probably about 9 or 10 years old and started reading was a novelist. I grew up with Robert A. Heinlein as my favorite author. My dad read his juvenile books to me, which are still great, still hold up. I'm reading them to my kids right now. Actually, I'm going on a read through of the classics, including books like Starship Troopers, Half Spacesuit Will Travel, and they really just latched into my imagination. And after a few years of consuming those books and other novels from various fantasy and science fiction writers, I really was enamored with the idea of creating my own stories like that. So I knew after I eliminated being a prosecutor, I knew I wanted to be a soldier and an author. And I do have a collaborative novel out with Tom Kratman and Casey Azell. So I actually am both a soldier and have been a soldier, and I am an author. So
we will talk about that.
Very blessed.
We will talk about that. And we will talk about that novel on the back end of this interview. Sure. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I mean, that's basically it. So that's how I came into it. Now, the actual path that way, throughout my teen years, I wrote several things that sucked really bad, but I kept plugging at it. I ended up getting accepted to West Point. I was the last member of my class admitted to West Point. I know this because they didn't even have my name tags ready when I got to West Point. They called me New Cadet Delta Force because I was walking around with a slick uniform. Hey, New Cadet Delta, where are you headed? Sorry, sir, they don't have my name tags. I didn't ask you for a fucking excuse, New Cadet Delta. Keep moving.
Which senator, which senator, congressperson, or I guess presidential? I guess your father was in Vietnam, so you it's possible you could have gotten one of the 100 presidential things.
No. My dad did not have a Medal of Honor, and
yeah,
any combat awards he did have may still be stuff I can't talk about. So I will say it was Wally Herger in California, one of the Republican districts up north, well away from San Francisco and San Fernando Valley and all those areas. So Northern California, the part that keeps trying to break away, the part that wants to be Jefferson really, really bad, is where I went to high school and where I got my nomination.
And then Susanville's on like the desert side of the Sierras, right?
Yeah, it's pretty dry, but it is on the desert side, but it's also it's still pretty green. We have a lot of lakes, so it's not properly into like the Mojave or anything. So it's actually pretty good terrain up there. It gets pretty cold. Bit of a tangent, but my dad's last duty station in the Army was Alaska. So when he said we were retiring and moving to California, I had Baywatch in my head. I was tragically disappointed when I went to a place that was still snowing in late April. So that was I was like, well, crap, we could have just stayed in Alaska, Dad.
What did your dad do that you can't talk about, like directionally?
I'll talk to you offline.
Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah, all right, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, we can talk offline. You can leave this in the video, but you and I can talk offline.
Yeah, of course. Very tantalizing. Okay.
So his MOS, I can tell you his MOS. He was a helicopter pilot. He was retired as a CW4, Chief Warrant Officer 4, and he had a much more positive attitude about the Army than I did when I left, because he spent his whole time flying helicopters and not necessarily putting up with officer bullshit. So yeah, he started out in attack and then transitioned to scout. So he started out in Cobras and then ended up flying OH-58s, as well as a few other airframes throughout his career.
Okay.
So
I'm getting what you're putting out. Okay, I got it.
So that was my dad. He was awesome.
Was he around when they were using OH-58 Deltas on the Mexican border to, back before the Marines like shot a farmer? Yeah.
Amongst other things. But yeah, so he was really freaking cool. And he was an awesome dad, Vietnam vet, but he taught me not to assume that you have to lean into the negative stereotypes of a veteran, because he had gone through Vietnam and he was very stable. He was a very loving father. He had some issues. I'm not going to say he did, but he was present and affectionate and disciplined and stayed engaged with me and my older brother and my mom. And I always took that as a source of strength for when I would go to Iraq and Afghanistan. It set a good standard for, if you have issues, you need to deal with them. You need to seek out help if you need help, but you don't get to take them out on your family. So I always appreciate that about him. So when I joined the Army, even though I come from a very heavily military family, I didn't feel pressure to join the Army. I thought my dad was awesome and I wanted to be like him. So it was not a push thing. It was a pull leadership thing.
So you said you went to West Point, right? How was the cow?
She walks, she's talked, she's full of chalk. The lacteal fluid extracted from the female of the bovine species is highly prolific to the nth degree. Oh my God, I can't believe you made me do that. But yeah, I do remember how the cow was.
I almost went to West Point. I had appointments to all three, and I decided to go to, sunny California instead. It was worth it, but I was like I tried to get any edge I could, so I was starting to memorize that stuff, right? So what is it? She walks, she talks, she's full of chalk. The female member of the bovine species.
The lacteal fluid extracted from the female of the member of the bovine is highly prolific to the nth degree, but nth is you're supposed to count how many cartons of milk are on the dinner table, and then say highly prolific to the seventh degree. That. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of sing-songy, cutesy knowledge we have to do too. I'm not going to recite it all for you right now because it's late and I'm tired.
Okay, anyway, sorry, continue. I didn't mean to throw you off on that.
No, you're good. You're good. So I kind of got busy at West Point because I had gone to public school in California, and it just wasn't that hard to get good grades in public school in my town in California. So I never learned how to study. I could just sit in class and kind of listen and regurgitate well enough on homework and tests to get good grades. That was not true. That was not true at all. I had a very much artificially inflated opinion of my intelligence until I got to West Point, and where I was generously average for the folks there. And the first couple of years were very much a struggle to keep my GPA above the minimum. My dad also did die in a helicopter crash when I was a freshman, a plebe, as it's called. Civilian helicopter crash, actually. He'd survived all the combat and other adventures with the Army and just had a mechanical failure in his civilian helicopter and died in a crash when I was a plebe. So I think it was, I'm not going to lie, that was pretty damn rough. I think I had some undiagnosed depression as a result of it. So I was frankly kind of a shitty cadet from that point for a long time, because I went into survival mode. I wasn't really trying to excel or make the most of the experience anymore. I was just trying to get through it. So I didn't write much. I slept as much as I could, and then did the bare minimum to make sure that I was passing my PT test and had a 2.0 GPA. I failed one course a semester because you could get away with that. So I picked one course. I picked one.
Was it the engineering course? I would pick the engineering course because it's the hardest.
It was 1 year. It was discrete dynamical systems, which is a math course that I think only exists at West Point. I might be wrong about that.
I'll be honest. That's one of the reasons I didn't go to West Point, because I
I was a history major and I had to take this shit.
Well, I had taken all the way to differential equations at like local colleges, and they're like, nope,
And they
you're
wouldn't
gonna have to
recognize it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, are you like? It's like 2 years of math I got to redo. Are you nuts? So I
And
didn't
it was always first period too. I always had math or physics first period, and it's not that I couldn't grasp it. It's just that I couldn't grasp it that fucking early in the morning. Like I would go in for additional instruction with the professor, and they'd explain it to me, and I'd be like, "Oh, so you mean like this?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, just." It's the same thing we talked about in class, Cadet Watson. What's your problem? I'm like, sir, I don't know. I'm stupid. I'm stupid from 0400 until about 0900, and then I can think again. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, you're night owl like me, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it's almost like 144 where you are right now.
It is 144 in Oklahoma right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went into survival mode at West Point, wasn't writing for a while. Started to get my shit together again, started dating the woman who's now my wife, Michelle, and that helped a lot because we were very good for each other. And, just having something positive in my life helped me focus a lot. And she found some of the stuff I had written in high school, and God bless her. She was like, this is very good. It wasn't very good, but it was a good attempt for somebody who had no formal training outside of English class.
You're lucky because my wife doesn't like any of my stuff, so it's fine.
Well, I'll get to that. There's another iteration of this with my wife reading my stuff. This iteration was she read it and said, this is really creative. You're really good. You should keep writing, which was very encouraging. And so I intermittently throughout the Army, I would write more seriously or less seriously, but I was busy being an officer, which takes a lot of time, and, new wife, growing family. We had 3 kids at various points while I was in the Army. We still have all of them, plus a 4th from when I was a civilian. But so we're raising kids. I'm got my Army career, trying to do right by my soldiers, trying to make sure they're ready, because we were year on, year off deployments for a long time. So the training cycle in between was pretty brutal, and I'm trying to get the most out of it, trying to make it as realistic as possible to give these guys the best chance they can to survive in Iraq and Afghanistan. And fortunately, I have a pretty good record on that front of bringing guys home. So writing was always there, but in the backseat, right? I started engaging as a fan on a chat board called Bane's Bar. It's run by our publisher, Bane.
Which was almost single-handedly destroyed by...
Yeah, that's a whole other story. Yeah. That's a whole nother story. But so I started engaging on Bane's Bar because I wanted to talk to one author in particular, a guy named Tom Kratman. Tom wrote a book. He's written several books, but the one that I read first was called A Desert Called Peace, which you may know is a reference to how Romans handled insurgencies very frequently in their heyday. They created a desert,
salted the earth,
and called it peace. So the book is very bloodthirsty. And I came across this book as I was recovering from an IED blast that had killed 2 my comrades and broken my arm and leg.
This was in Afghanistan or Iraq?
Iraq, 2006.
Okay.
My commander was Captain Douglas DeCenzo. He died in the blast because I was riding in his Humvee, and then the gunner, Specialist Robert Blair, did not make it. The driver, Specialist Matthew Owens, and I both were blown out of the Humvee and survived with various injuries. We're both doing okay these days. So I was recovering from that injury. And as you might imagine, I was not in a very charitable mood towards insurgents. And A Desert Called Peace, if you've never read it, opens up with the protagonist literally crucifying a bunch of insurgents in Afghanistan. So
as one does.
Yeah, as one does. And that spoke to me in my anger. And I read through all of his existing catalog at the time in a month, and I realized I could reach out to him online. So I befriended him on Bane's Bar, and we just became, internet pen pals, just talking about various politics, books, the military. He gave me a lot of great advice. I mean, our service dates don't actually overlap. There's a small gap, but he gave me a lot better advice than almost any other officer that was in charge of me.
When did he retire? Do you know when he got out?
I think it was 04 or 05, but before I commissioned.
Oh, wow. He overlapped me entirely.
Yeah. Well, and he'd been in since the late 70s. So
Yeah.
he served for a while. So I made friends with him, and I was continuing to write in the background. And I never asked Tom to look at anything because I was an Army officer and I was very much against nepotism of any
We
sort.
all are.
Yeah.
I like that kind of stuff disgusts me. But anyway, like,
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, there are exceptions and there are things like that, but like, particularly family stuff, not a fan.
Yeah. So as I'm getting, my career's progressing, I hit 8 or 9 years, and I'm realizing I'm getting further and further away from the stuff I love about the Army, which is honestly command. Like, I love being a platoon leader, fire support officer when I had my small team of fisters attached to a mech infantry company. That was pretty brief, but I still enjoyed that. And then being a battery commander as an artillery officer, that was all great stuff. And it was when you get promoted to major in the Army, you go through like an 8 to 10 year cycle where it's terrible. You're just a staff officer the whole time. And maybe you get a battalion when you get promoted to lieutenant colonel at the end of that. But honestly, probably not. For most guys, you don't get your battalion, because if you didn't make everyone happy along the way, and you don't have glowing reports that make you sound like Napoleon Bonaparte all the way along the way, then there's a good chance you're not going to get a battalion. So I didn't have to leave, but we talked about it and we decided, okay, it's time to grow up, time to figure out what I want to do in the real world. And I had been wounded. I have a bunch of x-rays. So, when I was getting ready to get out, I was like, okay, well, let me go talk to the doctors. And they were like, yeah, you should have been med boarded like 8 years ago. Like you like you shouldn't have been pushing on this stuff, like you're an idiot, and I was like, well, there were troops to lead, so I was going to keep leading them. So they were like, all right, let's start your med board. And I was like, okay. And let me tell you, Sean, going through a med board in the Army is awesome. Like, because here's why.
I was expecting like, what is it, CIF, like turning equipment back in at CIF.
No,
like that kind of experience.
Dude, it's so cool. Like, experience is I'm sure some people have been through med boards and they were absolutely awful. But my stuff was so well documented and ironclad that like none of the doctors were skeptical. All the lawyers involved were on my side. Like, it was a very easy process. But more than that, you remember not The Office with Steve Carell, but Office Space, the movie?
Oh, yeah.
I was Peter from Office Space for a year in the Army. It was glorious. Like, I told every officer exactly what I thought when they asked me my opinion. I didn't pad anything. I followed customs and courtesies. I said, with all due respect, it's in the Geneva Convention. Look it up. No, but seriously, like, it was very much like, it was just so awesome. And I got off work at like 1,500 every day. No one questioned it. Like, it was amazing. I wasn't doing PT. I was at medical appointments. I don't mind working out, but I didn't want to get up at 5 if I didn't have to. It was just glorious for a year. And one of the results was I had time to write. I had time to write. Like, I would, there'd be time throughout the day where I wasn't doing anything. They didn't want to give me too much responsibility because I'm on my way out. Largely, I became like a dirtbag contractor consultant almost. Like, the colonel would call me in. He'd be like, all right, you don't have a career to protect. What do you think? Like, since you've done all this, like, you've been a battery commander, you've been a battalion fire support officer, you were the brigade fire support officer for a while. What do you think about this plan? And I would, since he knows I have no asses to kiss, I'd be like, sir, this part would work. This part would work. The rest of this is a pipe dream. And I could say that with no fear of retaliation. So I actually became pretty good pals with my very last battalion commander. We were, on decent terms before I left.
See, I was super naive. I just told it like it was. That time I had no idea. It wasn't until I was in the civilian world that I figured out. I did too,
but I used to get chewed out for it. That's the difference. Like I was very honest throughout my entire career, and right. I was frustrated because I felt that honesty should be the standard. And as we both probably know, it wasn't always necessarily the standard.
More in the military that, like, outside of the military, it is not. It is the opposite is the standard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get you. I'm fortunate I work for a pretty good company and lots of ex-military guys. So,
Okay, yeah. So good culture.
coincidentally.
Yeah.
So all I had to say for that last year, I was, it was so chill. And I had time to write it. I finished my first novel, which I still hope to publish someday. It needs some more work. But I got an offer from a small press to publish it, as was. Like they read like the first few chapters, like, this is good. We'd like to publish it. And I won't say who the small press was because I'm still friends with that person. I really appreciate that they offered to publish it. But I had enough ego that I kind of wanted it to go through a traditional house.
Yeah, we'll chat. We'll chat offline.
Yeah, like I had enough ego that I wanted to go through traditional house. Great guy. I'll recommend that dude to work with. He's, again, no issues with that dude. It wasn't him. It was me. So I'm agonizing, right? I'm like, do I sell it? Like, I know I can sell a novel. Like, I'll have a novel out in the world. I should do it, right? Like, I shouldn't be egotistical about this. But I really wanted my first novel to go through Bain. Like, I really wanted that to be a thing. Not everything I do has to be through Bain. Like, I'm happy to work with Chris Kennedy or a bunch of other small presses, but I just wanted that first novel through a traditional house. I wanted to clear that hurdle and do that the old-fashioned way, just for my own peace of mind. But I wasn't going to, like, I knew some guys at Bain, especially Tom. I was pretty good friends with him at that point. But I was like, I don't want to, I don't want to do it. I don't want to try to, like, we're friends because we're friends. I don't want him to think that, I was just buttering up to try to get a novel published, because I wasn't. I really appreciated his work and I really appreciated his perspective on things. My wife had no such compunctions. So Michelle messages Tom Kratman, because they're Facebook friends too, and says, Tom, Justin would never ask this, so I will. He's about to sell his book to a small press, and I think maybe Bain would be interested. It's a military fantasy. It's right in their wheelhouse. It's something that I think everyone would really enjoy. Is there anyone he can talk to? I'm not asking you to just, like, go to the head editor and pound the desk, but, like, is there any course he can pursue with Bain? And Tom said, okay, I promised no lesser a personage than God that I would not read a friend's work unless he's already a professional and we're doing business. So I can't read Justin's manuscript because we're friends. I'll have these two people read Justin's manuscript. And if they tell me that he doesn't suck, Justin can write me a short story. And then if the short story doesn't suck, then I can work with, and it kind of spiraled in that. He sent it to Vivian Raper in England, who has been in a few short story anthologies or is in one short story anthology with Tom and will be in the next one, I think. And Casey Gazelle, who read the manuscript. Both of them said, pretty darn good. Still new, it wasn't ready for primetime yet, but he's got potential. So that's how I actually broke into publishing for real, to actually get published. That's how I started working with Bain. I wrote a novella. I ended up writing one short story for Tom, but that anthology fell through. And then I wrote a novella for Tom in his Carrera-verse anthology, Wars of Liberation. And then through Casey, I got some Chris Kennedy publishing anthology stuff and some other Bain anthology stuff. So I've got like 6 pieces of short fiction, and then the Romanov Rescue with Casey and Tom. So
just that, how did an anthology fall through? Was it a Bain anthology or was it another company?
It was an anthology with someone else.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. That answers its own question. All right. Sorry. Continue. So so Romanov Rescue. Tell me more. What's it about?
So the Romanov Rescue is an alternate history novel, and it presupposes that some of the royal family survive the execution attempt instead of the entire imperial family dying. The real point of departure is General Max Hoffman, a name I'm sure you're familiar with. Is that the Brest-Litovsk negotiations, takes a wrong turn down an alley and sees communist troops doing what communist troops do with civilian populations, and thinks to himself, I understand why we put Lenin back in Russia. I understand we had to win. or we had to try to win. But we've unleashed something terrible on the world. Communism has to be strangled in its crib. So from that, you get a rescue attempt from various POWs who were in the Russian Guards units during World War I. The Germans assemble, arm, and help train a Russian force to go rescue the Romanovs, which they are partially successful at. So that's the crux of it. And it's done pretty well from what I understand. And we are going to have a second novel we're working on now. The title is still under debate, but we will continue the epic of the Russian Civil War. And we have plans to take this point of departure, alternate history, all the way up through the 70s if it continues to sell and people continue to like it. We have, I don't want to say too much because, as we're inspired, things may change a little bit, but we have a whole roadmap for how this affects the 20s, the 30s, World War II, and then the subsequent Cold War and how that all plays out.
And this is pure alternate.
Yep.
No
correct.
magic, no science fiction. Aside from just as you project forward, there might be minor turns, but not.
Yeah. There's no fantastical element. There's one guy made a different decision. Point of departure. There's no Ascidi shards. There's no time travel. Nothing of that sort. It is straight up alternate history, which is pretty research intensive.
Yeah.
Even for me, and I have a history degree, I still have to look up a lot of stuff and read a lot of stuff.
So I guess, Rasputin was
dead before we started. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Dead before we started because we start and the Romanovs are already in captivity is where the Romanov Rescue starts off. So Rasputin had already been murdered.
Right,
justly so.
So Russian Civil War, remind me of there's the whites and the reds. Is that
so? The two primary factions are the White Russians and the Red Russians, the communists, the Bolsheviks.
Right.
The White Russians actually had several advantages early on in the war. They had the trained officer corps. They had a lot of the military equipment. They had a lot of the best troops. What they did not have was unity of command. So you had a series of supreme commanders, Kornilov, Kerensky, Denikin, just one after the other. And then you have multiple commanders at the same time not cooperating at all. So the White Russians, had they been unified and motivated early in the Russian Civil War, could very well have crushed the Bolsheviks. They had everything they needed to do it. They just couldn't coalesce and accomplish it.
Now, were they royalists or were they Democrats?
They were.
I don't mean Democrats, but
yeah.
You know where I'm going. You know what I
mean. They were a coalition of monarchists and people who wanted democracy but not socialism in Russia and in the empire in general. So, but add to that, so we have the White Russians and the Red Russians are the two main factions. Add to that the Black Russians, which is a delicious drink with Kahlua. No, I'm kidding. That's not what it is. Black Russians were largely Ukrainian. We might call them libertarians.
Cossacks, basically.
Sort of. No, the Cossacks were something else. Again, this is why the Russian Civil War is difficult because it's, we say white and red. And then if you get a little more complex, you're like, oh, there's the Black Russians too that were largely focused in Ukraine under Nestor Makhno. And they were anarchists, basically. They wanted to have a minimalist government. And then you have the Cossacks who were mostly fighting for the whites, but not entirely. And were much more tribal, effective soldiers, but also brutal soldiers who had this bad propensity to commit pogroms against Jews. It's really rough. But then on top of that, you also have the Green Russians, which is a catch-all term for local militias and bandit groups. So you had just some towns that would shoot at communist or royalist troops, whoever approached, with good reason, because either group might maraud through and take your chickens and the grain you have stored up and leave you high and dry. So, and then on top of that, you have, think of all the Soviet republics, right? You have all of those vying for independence at the same time. And then on top of all that, while the Russian Civil War is going on, we intervene in Siberia and around Archangel, along with the British, the French, Germans for a little bit, and the Japanese in Siberia. So you have foreign interventions, You have a bunch of splinter republics from the old Russian Empire vying for independence. You have two major factions of Russians fighting it out, and then multiple militias and bandit groups operating with impunity because Russia's so goddamn big.
Yes, say more about our involvement, because I remember I had to do a lot of research on the Russian Far East, and I recall reading something about Americans, and I don't think it was like volunteers; it was like U.S. military, right?
Yeah, it was U.S. military under color of authority. Now, our justification for being there, and we did fight the communists somewhat, but because the White Russians were so disorganized and didn't appear to have unity of command, we didn't commit to the war with either expeditionary force. The purpose of both expeditionary force was to evacuate Allied troops still in Russia. The most famous example is the Czech Legion. This is something that you run into early if you start studying, but the reason the Romanovs were actually killed when they were was that Sverdlov, Lenin, and probably Lenin too, were receiving reports that the Czech Legion was getting closer to where the Romanovs were being kept. So they were afraid they couldn't get a relief force there in time if the Czech Legion decided to liberate the Romanovs. There's no indication the Czech Legion was going to do that. But the communists were concerned enough about it that they ordered the Romanovs murdered. I won't even say executed, because executed implies legal justification. Murdered by Yurkovsky and his men.
Okay. The U.S. force, again, like, do you recall what unit, or I'm just fascinated by it?
Amongst others, I don't recall the entire order of battle, but amongst others were the 69th Infantry, commanded by a familiar face to you, Wild Bill Donovan.
I.e., like the founder of the USS, not founder,
the founder
but the head
of the
USS?
OSS. Yes, the founder of the OSS was part of the Siberian expedition. Yes.
So my wife's grandmother reported to him. She was in she was in the OSS. I think it was like an analyst type. But yeah, anyway, like lots of weird.
Donovan was a man among men. I read his biography in preparation for this project as well, and would sing to his men in battle like old Irish chanties, and like just brave as I mean, he's a Medal of Honor winner. Just brave as you could ask for, smart as a whip. Guy was a successful prosecutor, like politically astute, like without being a complete sleazeball. Like he's going to play a big role in this series as long as it continues.
So he was a colonel in charge of the 69th Regiment?
He was the regimental commander by that point, but I would have to double check. Yeah.
I mean, how old was that guy when he ran the OSS?
He was a young colonel, though. Keep that in mind. Like they made him young back then. I can look it up.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, William Donovan won the Medal of Honor in France in World War I.
Yeah, so maybe he's 20. So he would have to be
probably his mid-20s, I think, if I remember correctly from the biography.
So maybe he was in his mid-50s.
Well, and he tried to go with Roosevelt's volunteers, but I can't remember exactly what the circumstances were, but that fell through. So he didn't end up going with Roosevelt instead, and he ended up going with the New York Regiment.
Okay, so he's from New York.
Yeah, he was Albany, or Buffalo, sorry. He was Buffalo, which that's actually another cool thing about his biography is they talk a lot about the Buffalo Irish community and how rich that experience was for him growing up. So
fascinating. I didn't intend to take you like all the way, but this book sounds.
I'm happy to talk about it.
When did it come out?
The Romanov Rescue, or
yeah.
So that was November of last year, and the paperback will be out in November of this year. And we hope to turn in the sequel to Bane, hopefully spring of 2023. We hope for a release date next year sometime.
And how's that process work? Because there's like 3 authors, right?
There's 3 authors. We largely take responsibility for various point of view characters. So Tom has responsibility for the rescue force and its commander. I took responsibility in the first book for 2 of the guards on the Romanov family, who were more sympathetic and more human, not dyed-in-the-wool communists. Because that's another thing you read about, is the Romanovs guards were not all Reds necessarily. Some of them were actually quite friendly with the Romanovs. Others were quite beastly. I wrote about two guards who were on better terms with the Romanovs, so to speak, although that's more complex than that. And then Casey in the first book had responsibility for, it's on the cover, so it's not a spoiler. They used the L-59 blimp, which is a real historical aircraft that has the record for the longest lighter than air combat mission from a mission in Africa in real life. It has that. So the Germans detail the L-59 to carry the rescue force into Russia. So she wrote from the air crew's perspective. I also took all the commies. So I write all the Central Committee meetings from Sverdlov or Lenin or Trotsky's perspective. Of the three, Trotsky was probably the best, but still a Bolshevik.
Speaking of Central Committee meetings and the OSS, are you familiar with the Simple Sabotage Manual?
I'm not, actually.
Yeah, I just do yourself a solid after this. Look up the OSS Simple Sabotage Manual. Okay. It has basic sabotage techniques that you would use to, ruin railroad tracks and things like that. But it also has techniques for ruining organizations. So nice. It has how to run meetings, right? Where you anytime you want to waste time on something, establish committees. And then ask lots of questions, like just any and every dysfunctional meeting you've ever been a part of has a section in the OSS Simple Sabotage Manual. Just nice. Trust me, it is well worth your time.
It's you should be the lazy, hardworking officer in the Prussian paradigm of the four square of officers.
Von Manstein's Matrix, right?
Yeah. Or the stupid hardworking. Sorry, lazy hardworking is a paradox, but yes. Von Manstein's Matrix, yes.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. So when I was in grad school, General Shinseki showed up, and he met with a bunch of in
his black beret.
Yeah, I remember. Oh yeah, that was a whole thing, right? But this is after. This was, I think, after he retired, or after he had on the order of several 100,000, and Rumsfeld basically made him a persona non grata for telling the truth. But they had they organized a breakfast up in Cambridge, and he kind of related, are you all familiar with von Manstein's Matrix? We're like, no, what is it? And he went through all what was it?
If they're
smart and lazy, those are your general officers, right?
Yep, those are your commanders, because they'll know to delegate. You're smart and hardworking are your staff. You're stupid and lazy are liaisons.
And they're harmless, ignore them. But you're stupid and industrious. They must be expunged from the military.
Yeah, they have to be shot because they're too dangerous to live.
Yeah. Oh my Lord! All right, well, where can people find the Romanov Rescue? I mean, simple question.
So it's seen it in the wild in Barnes & Noble. It's on Amazon. It's wherever fine books are sold. If you go to my website, www.justinwatsonbooks.com, we'll link it in the comments. It's right there, beautiful, facing you on the front page. I really love the cover art. The blimp on there is very well done. But yeah, you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the Bain website. It's all over the place.
All right. It was a pleasure, my friend, and thank you. And everybody should check out the Romanov Rescue.
Thanks, Sean.
All right. Have a great night. Thank you.
You too. Good night.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.